Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive.
Today we're looking at a topic that's been getting a lot of attention.
Marriage rates.
They're at a historic low.
Oh, wow.
And what's even more interesting,
It seems like fewer men are proposing these days.
so what's the deal? Why aren't men popping the question as much as they used to?
Well, it's not just about like cold feet or commitment issues.
I think the whole landscape of relationships has really shifted.
Dramatically, even.
And there are a whole web of factors at play here.
Yeah, it's not like our parents' generation.
Where walking down the aisle was basically the default
You're like, yes.
expectation.
So let's unpack this a bit.
What are some of the biggest changes that have kind of contributed to this whole shift?
Well, one of the most significant factors I think we have to acknowledge is
The evolution of gender roles
we can't ignore the impact of the feminist movement.
on how we view relationships today
It sparked really important discussions about equality.
and challenge those traditional power dynamics.
And some research even suggests that this shift has led to,
Almost a sense of uncertainty among some men.
especially when it comes to navigating the expectations around proposals.
Like, do the old school traditions still apply?
It's like the script has been flipped.
And no one's quite sure what the new dance steps are.
Exactly.
It makes sense that some guys might hesitate to propose.
If they're not even sure what the rules are anymore.
Exactly. And this uncertainty isn't just limited to social expectations.
It's really intertwined with the economic realities
That many men are facing today.
We're talking about skyrocketing living costs
Crippling student loan debt.
and housing prices that are just astronomical.
You're telling me.
Every time I turn around, the cost of, everything is going up.
Right.
I've got friends who are putting off,
Major life decisions.
like buying a house or starting a family.
Simply because they can barely make ends meet?
It's a valid concern.
And then when you layer those financial pressures on top
Well,
of,
Already significant commitment of marriage.
it's no surprise that some men might feel apprehensive.
Think about it.
You're not just committing to a partner.
You're also taking on a shared financial future.
Right, and let's not forget the cost of the wedding itself.
Oh my gosh.
I've heard horror stories about couples going into serious debt.
Just to have the perfect celebration
How can you even think about popping the question?
when you're worried about how you'll afford the party afterwards.
The pressure to have, like, an extravagant wedding can definitely add another layer of anxiety.
To the whole proposal equation.
But beyond the financial piece,
Yeah.
I think there's also...
A deeper emotional landscape at play here.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
We've talked about societal shifts and financial pressures.
But what about the elephant in the room?
The fear factor.
I mean, divorce rates are pretty high.
And no one wants to go through a painful and costly breakup.
Absolutely, the fear of divorce is a very real...
And valid concern.
No one enters into marriage expecting it to end.
But the reality is that many do.
And that can cast a long shadow over the whole idea of taking that leap.
Especially when you consider the emotional and financial toll that divorce can take.
It's not just about heartbreak.
It can completely upend your life in so many ways.
Precisely. And this fear isn't necessarily about
A lack of commitment.
to the relationship itself,
It's more about a realistic awareness
of the complexities.
and potential challenges that come with marriage.
Particularly in a society where divorce is,
More common than it used to be.
it's like, even if you're deeply in love,
And committed to your partner
that fear of things potentially going wrong.
can still linger in the back of your mind
And it makes sense that some men might be more hesitant to propose.
if they're grappling with that anxiety.
And it's a perfectly understandable response.
And this ties into another interesting trend that we're seeing.
The rise of cohabitation.
More and more couples are choosing to live together.
Without getting married.
They're experiencing the benefits of partnership.
Without the legal and societal pressures of marriage.
It's like saying, hey, we can have a fulfilling,
Committed relationship.
without necessarily needing that piece of paper.
Exactly.
It's about prioritizing
It truly matters to them.
as individuals and as a couple.
Rather than feeling bound by those traditional expectations.
Which makes you wonder if the whole concept of relationship goals,
Being rewritten.
it's definitely evolving and part of that evolution.
I think involves
More
acknowledging
very real anxieties.
some men might have about traditional proposals.
Particularly the perceived shift in power dynamics.
That's an interesting thought. Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So, in the past,
The act of proposing often reinforced those traditional gender roles,
with the man taking the lead.
and the woman being the recipient.
But as we move toward a more equitable model of partnership,
That dynamic can feel a bit outdated for some.
so it's not necessarily about being afraid of commitment itself.
but more about anxieties around how that commitment is expressed.
especially within the context of evolving gender roles.
You hit the nail on the head.
For some men, proposing might feel like relinquishing
A certain level of control.
within the relationship,
It's not about dominance or power in a negative sense.
but rather a sense of vulnerability,
That can be challenging to navigate.
especially if you're already grappling with fears about commitment.
And the potential for heartbreak,
It's like putting your heart out there on a silver platter.
hoping it doesn't get stomped on.
And in a world where vulnerability is often misconstrued as weakness,
It's understandable that some men might approach that step.
with a bit of trepidation.
Absolutely. And this leads us to
Another crucial aspect of this whole conversation.
the personal equation,
Every individual has their own timeline,
their own definition of,
what a successful relationship looks like.
and their own level of emotional readiness for marriage.
That's a really important point.
You know, we can talk about societal trends,
And economic factors all day long.
but ultimately
The decision to propose,
is deeply personal.
it's about looking inward and asking yourself,
Am I truly ready for this level of commitment?
and does marriage align with my personal values and goals?
Exactly. And with the increased awareness around mental health,
It's encouraging to see more men
taking the time to do that inner work,
to really assess
their emotional readiness,
before taking such a significant step.
that's a sign of maturity and self-awareness, really.
It's about recognizing that rushing into marriage
Just because it's what you're supposed to do
isn't necessarily the recipe.
for a happy and fulfilling relationship.
Right. Marriage isn't a guarantee of happiness.
Well, it's a choice,
It's a journey that you embark on with another person.
and it requires a certain level of
Emotional maturity and readiness
to navigate the inevitable ups and downs.
that come with building a life together.
So we've got a lot to unpack here.
Evolving gender roles,
Economic pressures,
the fear factor.
and the importance of individual choice
It's clear that there's no single simple answer.
to why fewer men are proposing.
But I think what's emerging is a more nuanced
And compassionate understanding.
of the complexities behind this decision.
It's not just about cold feet.
Or commitment phobia.
It's about navigating a whole new landscape
Of expectations and personal anxieties.
I couldn't agree more.
And as we move forward,
I think it's crucial to create a space
where men feel comfortable
expressing their vulnerabilities.
and anxieties around this topic,
It's about moving away from judgment
and creating a more understanding
and supportive environment.
for everyone involved.
Well said. Now, before we jump into the listener questions,
I want to touch on one more aspect of this conversation.
that I think is fascinating,
You know, as we delve deeper into these shifting dynamics,
around marriage and proposals,
one thing that strikes me is how we often talk about marriage,
as if it's a single monolithic concept.
but the reality is
Far more diverse.
and nuance
What marriage means to one couple
might be completely different.
from what it means to another.
And that's perfectly okay.
You're so right.
It's like we try to fit this complex,
Multifaceted institution into a one-size-fits-all box.
and that can lead to a lot of pressure.
And unrealistic expectations.
Exactly.
And I think part of what's happening is
A recognition that marriage isn't necessarily.
the only path to a fulfilling and committed partnership,
We're seeing more and more couples,
forging their own unique paths.
whether that's through cohabitation
Domestic partnerships,
or even just redefining what marriage means to them personally
it's like we're breaking free from the old script.
and writing our own love stories.
That's actually really exciting
It is.
because it allows for
More honesty.
and intentionality in relationships.
If marriage isn't the automatic next step,
Couples are forced to have
more open and meaningful conversations.
about what they truly want from their partnership,
It's about choosing to be together,
not just because it's expected,
but because it genuinely aligns.
with their individual values and goals.
Precisely.
And that brings us back to the personal equation.
We were discussing earlier,
The decision to get married, or even to propose,
should be driven by
individual readiness.
and a shared vision for the future.
And that readiness can vary so much from person to person,
Some people might feel ready for marriage in their early 20s,
while others might not feel that pull until their 30s or even later.
and that's perfectly normal.
Absolutely.
There's no universal timeline for these things.
What matters most is that the decision
Feels authentic,
and aligned with each individual's.
emotional, and personal growth.
We're moving away from the idea that there's a right age
Or stage of life to get married.
and embracing the idea that each person's journey is unique.
And with that comes a greater acceptance.
Of different relationship models.
Cohabitation, for example,
Used to be seen as a taboo.
or a stepping stone to marriage.
But now,
It's becoming a legitimate and fulfilling choice in its own right.
you're right.
It's no longer seen as this rebellious act.
Of defiance against societal norms.
For many couples,
It's a practical and meaningful way.
to experience partnership and shared living.
Without necessarily taking that legal step.
It's about finding what works best for them.
Regardless of what tradition dictates.
And that's a really positive shift, in my opinion.
I agree.
It's about challenging those outdated assumptions.
And creating relationships that are built on a foundation of
Mutual respect
open communication,
and a shared vision for the future.
whether that involves a marriage certificate or not.
So while we've been exploring why fewer men are proposing,
But this conversation has really expanded into something much bigger.
it's about the evolving nature of relationships and commitment.
In a world that's constantly changing.
You've hit the nail on the head.
It's about redefining
what it means
to be in a
and
loving,
partnership
in a way that makes sense.
for each individual and each couple.
And it's about recognizing that there are many different paths.
To happiness and fulfillment,
And that those paths don't always lead to the altar.
that's such an important point.
It's about letting go of those rigid expectations and embracing the diversity of human experiences.
Which in a way can be really liberating, don't you think?
Absolutely.
It frees us from the pressure to conform to a certain mold
And allows us to create relationships.
that truly reflect our individual values and desires.
And it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
For how we express love and commitment.
That's not just about
grand gestures.
and elaborate proposals anymore.
It's about finding those small, everyday ways
To show up for each other,
and build a life together.
whatever that looks like.
Love.
Because ultimately, isn't that what really matters?
It's not about the ring or the wedding.
Through the societal expectations,
It's about the connection,
the intimacy,
the shared journey
and the unwavering support.
that two people offer each other.
So well said.
And as we navigate this evolving landscape of relationships,
I think it's important to remember that.
compassion and understanding are key.
You're absolutely right.
It's about having those open and honest conversations
With our partners.
about what we want
What we fear,
and what we dream of.
both individually and as a couple.
And it's about being willing to challenge
Those outdated scripts
and create new narratives for love and commitment.
that feel authentic and fulfilling.
Beautifully put.
So as we move towards the final part of our deep dive,
I want to pose a question to our listeners.
what do you think the future holds for marriage proposals?
Are we moving away from those traditional expectations
Or are we simply finding new ways
to express those age-old desires?
for love and commitment?
It's a fascinating question to ponder.
And as we wrap up this part of our conversation,
We want to hear from you
share your thoughts, your experiences, your hopes, and your fears.
about this evolving landscape of relationships, reflecting on everything we've talked about.
I'm starting to think this shift away from traditional marriage proposals.
Might actually be a sign of progress.
That's an interesting perspective.
What makes you say that
Well, for so long, marriage was held up,
as this ultimate goal
the happily ever after.
that everyone was supposed to strive for?
Right.
But maybe stepping back
From that rigid expectation
is opening up new possibilities
for defining love and commitment.
on our own terms.
I see what you mean.
It's like we're moving beyond this idea
That there's only one right way to do relationships.
and embracing the beautiful messiness
Of human connection.
Exactly, and maybe, just maybe,
This shift is leading to more honesty
and intentionality.
on how we approach relationships.
If marriage isn't the default expectation
Couples are forced to have those deeper conversations,
about what they truly want,
both individually and as a pair,
it becomes less about following a societal script
and more about creating a partnership.
that reflects their shared values and aspirations.
Right. And I have a feeling that this increased intentionality,
Could lead to stronger, more fulfilling relationships in the long run,
if couples are choosing to commit
whether through marriage or another path,
with a deeper understanding of themselves,
and their partner's needs and desires.
they're setting a solid foundation for the future.
I completely agree.
It's about shifting away from the idea of marriage as a finish line
And embracing it as a conscious, deliberate journey.
that two people choose to embark on together.
And that journey might involve a traditional proposal,
And a big wedding.
or it might involve a completely different expression of commitment.
The point is,
It's a choice made freely and authentically
reflecting the unique dynamics.
of each relationship.
Beautifully said.
And for those who might be feeling a bit lost,
In this new landscape of relationships,
I think the key is.
open and honest communication,
That's so important.
talking to your partner about your fears
Your expectations
and your hopes for the future.
can make all the difference.
It's about creating a safe space.
Where vulnerability is welcomed and respected,
And remember,
it's okay to challenge those outdated scripts.
and redefine what love and commitment mean to you.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening,
Whether you're single, dating, cohabitating, or married.
we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Perhaps it sparked some new conversations with your partner.
Or maybe it simply offered a fresh perspective.
On the ever-evolving world of relationships,
Whatever your takeaway,
remember this.
there's no right or wrong way.
To navigate relationships in the 21st century
The most important thing?
is to find what works for you and your partner.
And create a connection that brings joy, meaning, and a sense of shared purpose.
And never be afraid to question those societal norms.
Challenge those outdated expectations.
And create your own unique love story.
Because at the end of the day,
Love and commitment are about so much more.
than just checking boxes.
Or following a predetermined path.
They're about finding that special someone
Who sees you, accepts you,
and chooses to walk beside you.
every step of the way.
And that, my friends, is a journey worth celebrating.
Regardless of the form it takes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time.
Keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep loving the go.